Newcastle United have taken a massive step towards Champions League football after beating Chelsea by 2-0, and in this video we're going to be breaking down how they did it. And no, it wasn't just the red card. We're going to be discussing how Eddie Howe utilised a new system and tactics to not only break down Chelsea but ultimately get themselves the win. As I said, it wasn't just the red card that allowed Newcastle to really get into the game. In fact, the utilisation of a brand new system for them really did change the way that Chelsea would play against it and change the way that Chelsea would really line up and set up against this new look Newcastle attack. They opted for a 3-4-2-1, the exact same 3-4-2-1 that Ruben Amorim is currently using at Manchester United. However, they managed to play it a lot better than Manchester United did. Newcastle had real impact. They had real pace in the likes of Harvey Barnes and Anthony Gordon. They had a good metronomal play through Bruno Guimaraes and Tonali, recycling possession through round this really aggressive back three. Dan Burn taking the space that Neto would afford to him on a number of occasions. And then you had two really hard-working, quick, pacey players in Murphy and Livramento who were always willing to take those spaces out on these wide areas. This immediately posed Chelsea quite a big issue, and it was through the wide play from Murphy and Livramento, naturally dragging out Caicedo and Cucurella. But the problem they had with that is the inward runs from Harvey Barnes and Anthony Gordon. Because Colwill and Chalobah were marking Isak, obviously a huge major threat for Newcastle, Chelsea didn't necessarily want to open themselves up to the inside runs of Gordon and Barnes, and this meant that there was extra space on the flanks for both Murphy and Livramento, Murphy in particular. And once Newcastle managed to shuffle the ball out wide, it was then a case of flooding the box. Getting players like Isak in, getting players like Barnes in, but in particular, getting those midfielders in Bruno Guimaraes mainly and Sandro Tonali to be able to start to overload these Chelsea players once the ball went out wide. Getting into the box was absolutely crucial, and making sure that they're getting players into those attacking areas to give themselves the best opportunity of getting a goal. And this was really apparent for Newcastle's first goal. Really early on into the game, they caught Chelsea unaware. As Anthony Gordon is driving down the pitch, you've already got him spreading the play. Chelsea managed to regain possession and then drive back with Chalobah. But the aggression from Newcastle, you can see Alexander Isak here driving across, the aggression to try and pen Chelsea in was really important and really integral in not only winning the ball back but also catching Chelsea in a moment of transition. Look at the positioning of Lavia right here. He hasn't scanned properly, and if he has, he's really unaware of the amount of Newcastle players that are ready to pressurise onto this Chelsea back line. He hasn't got a shout, so as Sandro Tonali comes and closes down, you've now got the ball being loose. You've now got a number of Newcastle players in space, and the ability for them to then drive at their opponents is really, really likely. As you've got Sandro Tonali recycling the ball back through Bruno Guimaraes, remember these are your two midfielders, the two holding central midfielders in a really aggressive position. You've got Harvey Barnes in that inside channel. Alexander Isak, as we mentioned previously, has made that aggressive pressing run, which means that you need Harvey Barnes to start making that central movement. But notice on the far side as well, just off your screen, you've also got Jacob Murphy. He's going to be holding the width out on that right-hand side, causing a big problem for Cucurella in just a second. He's now entered your screen, and look at what you've got. You've got Murphy taking up this position here. You've got the ball going round from Bruno Guimaraes over to this right-hand side. But Cucurella has a problem. Because of the positioning of Harvey Barnes centrally, he's worried about this run right here between these two Chelsea players, between the left back and the centre back. You've got Colwill really marking the position of Guimaraes, you've got Chalobah being occupied by Tonali, and it leaves Cucurella in a big problem. Does he go and contest, or does he hold his position? He decides to hold his position, and that gives Murphy the time and space to be able to play across him. It's really well weighted around Cucurella rather than going over. And then what have you got? You've got those really good runs from Tonali, really good runs from Guimaraes, because as we mentioned, Isak isn't in the play. Barnes makes a run as well, and it's the run in between the centre-backs, the full-backs, and in between the two centre-backs, breaking those lines that's really, really important. It naturally comes over to Sandro Tonali as it gets whipped around, and they manage to score. It's really, really well done. A huge goal for Newcastle in the case of Champions League football, and this system just caught Chelsea off guard and really gave the momentum to Newcastle early on in the game. I firmly believe that Eddie Howe is one of the best tactical managers in the Premier League, and there is a reason, or several reasons, why he utilised this system against Chelsea. First of all, it really helps to really push players on and really mitigates a need for an extra central player in the middle of the park. We know that Joe Willock was injured. We know that Joe Linton wasn't able to play, which means that he relied upon Bruno Guimaraes and Sandro Tonali. We'll talk about Guimaraes in just a second. But it also asked a number of different questions of not only this Chelsea back line, but also their midfield positioning. And what I mean by that is utilising the actual hybrid positioning of Bruno Guimaraes. Instead of being sat next to Tonali the entire time, his hybrid positioning allowed him to position himself just behind or just next to Harvey Barnes and Anthony Gordon, just behind Alexander Isak. And what this did was it caused Chelsea a number of problems. It meant that Tonali went a little bit more central and Guimaraes just moved forwards between those two attacking midfielders, or those two tens in this particular system. It gave Newcastle a number of different avenues to pass through, but it also meant that they were overloading the centre of the park with Newcastle's 3 against Chelsea's 2. Because Madueke and Neto didn't necessarily want to drop back and help with that aggressive wide play, it meant that Cucurella and Caicedo oftentimes needed to come and contest, and that gave Chelsea a number of problems. As I mentioned previously, the infield runs of Barnes and Gordon were as always available, but if you add an extra player into this dynamic, aka Bruno Guimaraes, it means that all of a sudden there's a pass always on centrally, and it gives Guimaraes the option to now play reverse passes through into Barnes, reverse passes through into Gordon, and all of a sudden those avenues and channels centrally start opening up. You're not only relying on that wide play, and once you start opening up those central channels, Chelsea don't really know what to do. They don't really know how to combat it. Does Cucurella go? Does Madueke drop? Does Neto drop? How do they work with the counter-attack? And it was these questions that was being asked, especially in that first half, especially leading up to that red card, that started to frustrate Chelsea and started to really get under their skin. You had Cher, Botman and Byrne, again, like I said, being really aggressive, pushing really high, making sure they're condensing the pitch as much as possible. And this overload in the centre of the park just caused so many problems for Enzo Fernandez and Lavia, and it meant that Chelsea's back line were almost overwhelmed in these inside channels because of those runs from Barnes and Gordon. It was a masterstroke by Eddie Howe, and it was absolutely brilliant. And this is a really good illustration of what I'm talking about. So, although you don't have Anthony Gordon here, you've got Tino Livramento just picking up that position while Gordon is out of play. But you've got a really good example of that 3v2 that I was talking about. You've got one here, and one here, and this goes against that Chelsea midfield too. It caused them so many different problems. But what else have you got going on? I mentioned Alexander Isak, and I mentioned his role with this Newcastle attacking line. Look at the movement that he's making into that channel, and look what he's doing as well. It's just naturally dragging away Colwill. And that opens up space centrally for Newcastle to then move forwards. Look at where Bruno Guimaraes is. And all of a sudden, you're going to have a run from Harvey Barnes. You're going to have a pass from Bruno Guimaraes and a really good movement and pass from Murphy. And all of a sudden, this Chelsea defensive line, which looks fairly organised, it looks fairly compact, gets opened up within an instant. So as I said, the ball gets played through into Bruno Guimaraes. Look, he's asking for it. Look at how far Colwill has been stretched away from Chalobah because of that really good run from Alexander Isak. You've got Harvey Barnes now on his bike. He's ready to make that movement inside. You've got Bruno Guimaraes ready to receive the pass as well. Super, super good. Look at the amount of space that Guimaraes is in. Again, look at the overload. It's so, so good. The ball gets played in. As it gets played in, Guimaraes plays it through into an on-running Harvey Barnes, and really, the pass should have been better, and it should have carved Chelsea apart. It did, really, but it just was a little bit heavy, and it meant that Chalobah was able to come and get a block in. But this happened time and time again against Chelsea, and they just couldn't deal with it. The system was fantastic. Newcastle's defensive shape out of possession also caused Chelsea a number of problems, and I'll explain why. We know how Chelsea want to build at this point. We know that Enzo Maresca likes a 3 at the back, we know that he likes to invert one, and we know he likes a double pivot in that centre of play, meaning that they're able to push one midfielder on and create overloads in the centre of the park. But Newcastle are a bit wise to this. Eddie Howe is a bit wise to this, and this is what he came up with. Still utilising that 5 at the back formation, but dropping Murphy and Livramento next to that back 3 rather than next to that back 2, or that midfield 2, I should say. And then what you had was Gordon and Barnes dropping really deep, really narrow. And what this did is it made that Newcastle midfield line super compact. And if they're so narrow together, you can't get the running play from Palmer, you can't get it from Enzo, you can't get that space. And it forces Chelsea out wide yet again. Forces them to go to Neto and Madueke. And normally Chelsea fans will be like, oh, that's fine, that's okay. But then you're contested by both Livramento and by Murphy. And this caused Chelsea a number of problems, because it meant that if they weren't able to win that 1v1, it was automatically a turnover for Newcastle, and if they were, generally, Nicholas Jackson would be overwhelmed by Schär, Botman and Burn. Now, obviously, we know what Jackson does later, and he gets himself sent off, which causes Chelsea extra problems. But even before that card, before Jackson gets sent off, Chelsea just couldn't find a way through because of the dynamic running from Livramento and Murphy, because of the compactness of play from Barnes, Tonali, Guimaraes and Gordon, again really, really narrow, and then you've got that 3v1. They're not able to fill the box, they're not able to get into those positions, and it meant that Palmer was continuously having to drop a little bit deeper to try and get on the ball, because he couldn't find these pockets. He just couldn't get there. And it meant that Chelsea essentially were just stopped. They just weren't able to create those devastating opportunities that we know that they can create. It meant that Newcastle were pretty comfortable. This is a brief but decent showcase as to what I'm talking about. So, this is late on in the second half, and look at what you've got. You've got your Newcastle back 5. This is preventing those runners from coming into the box. You've got them being really aggressive. You've got Schär, you've got obviously Burn, and you've got Emil Kraft, who's dropped into a more central role from being at right back. Murphy's dropped back as well to help with the run of Sancho, and you've got your midfield 4. You've got Guimaraes, Tonali, Miley, and you've got Harvey Barnes. Again, look at how compact they are. Look at how narrow they are. Look at the difference between Guimaraes and look at the difference between Barnes. This prevents any kind of play through from Chelsea, and it means that they've got to go wide. They have to go out to this channel. Just so happens that Gusto tries to cross, and it does meet Reece James's head, but the pace that he's going at, the level that he has to try and reach to get onto that header, means that it's a very unlikely goal. And this is what Newcastle want, reducing the amount of opportunities, reducing the quality of those opportunities, and they did that pretty brilliantly throughout the entire match. Before we end, let's take a look at Newcastle's second. Of course, they win the game by 2-0, and this is how it played out. So it's a deep free kick from Sandro Tonali over towards Dan Burn, who is in acres of space. I know that Chelsea have 10 men, but I don't really think you can be allowing one of Newcastle's biggest aerial threats to have that amount of space, even though it is quite far away from the box. I just don't think it can be allowed, especially within a game of this magnitude. Nevertheless, they do allow that, and Dan Burn takes the ball down, and he's looking for a teammate. Bruno Guimaraes comes to help assist, and it gives him an option of a 2v1. Chelsea players aren't aware to this. They're not really making a good pickup of the play. They're not really reading the situation well enough, and as I said, it gives a 2v1 against Neto. Now, at this moment in time, Bruno Guimaraes has two options. He can either play it down into the channel back towards Dan Burn, who's making a pretty good run, or he can go infield and try to take a shot. He obviously takes the latter, and it gets a huge deflection off of Malagusto, who's trying to close the space. But I think there's far too much space between Gusto and Guimaraes to begin with. The Chelsea line drops a little bit bit too deep for my liking when it comes to the positioning of the ball. And of course, you've got that good run from Dan Burn that could have been played in a little bit earlier. Of course, as I said, it gets deflected and it goes in. It just is the tale of Chelsea's game in this particular moment, and a good example of Newcastle willing to take that risk and really willing to take that chance. And it's everything that I think they deserve. They were absolutely sensational in this game, not just tactically, but also with the way they set their system up. As I said, Eddie Howe is one of the best tactical coaches in the league currently. But of course, guys, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Newcastle fans, how do you feel about this massive win? And do you think you're getting Champions League football now? Chelsea fans, if any Chelsea fans are watching, let me know your thoughts on that Nicholas Jackson red card, now unavailable for the rest of the campaign if it stands due to it being a straight red. What are you thinking about that moment of madness, and what are you expecting from your side for the rest of the season? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, guys. I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something new, and I hope to see you in the next one. But until then, my friends, take care.